Hello and welcome to a Week 11 edition of the Bleacher Report Fantasy Football Show. My name is Adam Levitan. As always, joined by Michael Leone to talk about some players to trade for before your fantasy playoffs. Leone, I believe that is a Warren Moon jersey today. How's it going?
It is a Warren Moon jersey. I need to start investing in even more jerseys to start throwing you off the scent. But yeah, it's going well. As you joked about before the show, we kind of have football tonight. The Jets are playing, but we're back here for Week 11.
Uh, you realize that the people watching the show have no idea who Warren Moon is, right? I mean, you are now going to jerseys that are out of the realm of the youth here.
That's the only way to do it, man.
Okay.
I'm old now, officially.
As we said on today's show, we're going to go through some guys to trade for. I'm sure that many of your trade deadlines in your leagues are coming up here this week or next. Just generally speaking, I think some good advice for your bench, specifically as the playoffs get closer. You want to have more guys that are one injury away. In other words, backup running backs. You know, if you were carrying RJ Harvey this whole season, yeah, it wasn't great. You couldn't start him. You might really have something now. The same could be said for guys such as Brian Robinson behind Christian McCaffrey or Tyler Algier behind Bijan Robinson or a ton of other guys that are one injury away. Those are the best guys to have on your bench down the stretch here once your bye weeks are passed. All right, let's get into some guys here that we think are worth trading for. Number 6 on the list is going to be Luther Burden. And this might not even be one that you need to trade for. You might be able to just pick Luther Burden up off of waivers, but on a per route, on a per target basis, Luther Burden has been way better than DJ Moore, has been infinitely better than Alameda Zacchaeus. And we see this down the stretch year after year. Rookie wide receivers often do not hit until late in the year. Burden has more than earned his chance. Now we get DJ Moore a little bit banged up here. Leone, what do you think about the run out down the stretch here for Mr. Burden?
Yeah, he was someone the analytics community liked a ton coming into the year as, an underdrafted prospect, figuring him to have a ton of upside in this offense. He's definitely got more juice than Olamide. As you mentioned, DJ Moore on the injury report has that shoulder injury, DMP Wednesday, LP Friday, or LP today. There's a few ways that it works out for Burden. He might just surpass and start getting better playing time because of his talent, or an injury to multiple guys could thrust him into action. You mentioned the efficiency for him. He's at 2.78 yards per route run. Nobody else above 2 for Chicago. That's an absurd number. It's inflated a little bit by, a long touchdown. He doesn't have a ton of volume, ton of routes, but still he's caught 16 of his 18 targets on the year for 222 yards and a touchdown. So I'm with this one. I think this is a really good stash. You're better off having someone like this who, if things break right, has a huge ceiling versus, let's say, a Cooper Cup type on your bench that, is more likely to get you 8 to 10 points on a given week, but what that doesn't really do too much for your team as far as taking it to the next level for the playoffs.
All right. Number 5 on the list is an interesting one, Leone. We got somewhat surprising news this week. Joe Burrow returned to practice. It's tough because Joe Burrow might not actually come back if this team's out of the playoffs. So it's going to be Flacco for the next 2, maybe 3 weeks. If they can win 1 or 2, or maybe even 3 of those games, I do think that we'll see Burrow back from this toe injury. And he has a pretty decent schedule down the stretch. If you need quarterback help, it's worth putting Burrow on your bench. I think he is going to have some huge opportunity. Joe Flacco, since he's been the Bengals starter, is fantasy's number one quarterback. Imagine what Joe Burrow would do down the stretch with this defensive setup. So, Leone, it's a bit of a riskier one. You might not get anything from Joe Burrow down the stretch, but if you need quarterback help and you have room on your bench, I think it's a pretty interesting move to make. What do you think about Burrow rest of the way?
Yeah, we asked the co-pilot about the points per game offensive rankings for the Bengals with Joe Burrow. Since after his rookie year from 2021 to 2024, they've scored over 26 points per game with Joe Burrow at the helm in 3 of the 4 seasons. 2023, the one down year, including nearly 28 points per game last year. So, and speaking of last year, we kind of thought it was the perfect run out for Burrow in the passing offense with the Bengals defense kind of stinking and the Bengals being desperate in terms of having to play for the playoffs and like playing with this urgency. And there's like no way that could repeat. But we're headed for the exact same scenario as last year if Burrow does come back. Bad defense, desperate to win every game. They're going to play with a ton of urgency. They're going to put a ton on his plate. So I do like trading for Burrow now. The closer it gets to him actually returning, the tougher it's going to be. So the window could close very quickly here.
Oh, right. Let's do one more from the list before we get to your listener questions. And by the way, if anyone has any questions, feel free to put them into the chat here. We'll get to as many as we can. Number four on the list, Jameson Williams. So some people might be like, oh, this was a one-off fluke last week. Nothing really changed. Jameson Williams just happened to get hot. There was a change. Jameson Williams' route tree was totally different. He was running crossing routes. He was running stop routes. Previously, he was only running go routes. Why was that? Because Dan Campbell took over play calling for the Lions. On top of that, after this week, the Lions have 6 straight dome games to end the fantasy season. And that has been historically good for the Lions. And historically, it's just good for all teams to play in a dome good for their offense. So Jameson Williams would be one of my favorite guys to trade for here before the fantasy playoffs. Leone, how sticky do you think this Dan Campbell bump is for JMO?
Yeah, I'm a little skeptical the pass rate over expectation is sticky. I still think they'll be a little bit run heavy, but I mean, it can't hurt. They were plus 2% pass rate over expectation. They hadn't been better than minus 3% any other game throughout the season. So it was a big shift. And you hit on the dome game stuff. I mean, that's huge for a player with Jameson Williams' speed and big playability, especially when you start comparing that to your competition. This is when the weather is going to start to get bad for a lot of teams, especially in the Northeast. And to be very insulated from any potential weather weeks in those playoff weeks, I think is a pretty big deal. Still going to be, I think, a little boom or bust for Jameson Williams, but if you can get him in that flex spot or wide receiver 3, a lot more ceiling than he has shown thus far this season.
All right. Let's get to a few chats from the people here. First one is from T Greek. He says, do you trust Chase Brown? So the big news on Chase Brown is Samaje Perine hurt his ankle prior to the team's bye. He was not practicing Wednesday. We do not expect Samaje Perine to play in this game. That allows Chase Brown to handle the passing down work, handle the 2-minute work. And so, yeah, I mean, I do trust Chase Brown when Samaje Perine is out, especially matchups against Pittsburgh. So I know we have a pretty big projection already here on Chase Brown for this week, Leone. I think if you have him in season long, I'd be pretty excited to start him.
Yeah, Chase Brown didn't have a route share above 50%. He had one game above 50% route share prior to that game that Samaje Perine got hurt, and then he came out and had an 80% route share. So as you mentioned, he's going to get that really heavy workload. He had played 79, or he had 79% of the design rushes among running backs, 96% snap share. Previously was about 55% the previous 4 weeks. So it's a huge deal if Samaje Perine is out. And maybe this gives him a chance to earn back that heavier workload role right before Joe Burrow comes back. And we know that the injury to Burrow really had a huge negative impact on the outcome for Brown's ceiling. So he's actually another good player to target as an ad right now.
All right. This is from Shocker. He says, should I give up Ladd and Amarian Hampton to get Justin Jefferson? Ladd McConkey and Amarian Hampton to get Justin Jefferson. So Amarian Hampton supposedly, allegedly, will be back after this team's week 12 bye. If he is, I prefer the Ladd and Hampton side of this. I can see people wanting to get out from Justin Jefferson right now. Leone, they're scared about the way JJ McCarthy is playing. They do get a home game against the Bears this week, though, and I do think that McCarthy will play better here. How worried are you about Justin Jefferson, and what do you think about this trade?
Yeah, I'm worried. I never thought there'd be a world where the Vikings have a high pass rate and a solid pass rate over expectation, and it still didn't work out. Like that was the concern coming in, but that's what happens when you have JJ McCarthy scrambling a lot and taking a ton of sacks and just playing poorly overall. So I'm worried. Our trade calculator, though, has this as a pretty even trade. If you put an adjustment there for a 2-for-1 trade, it prefers Justin Jefferson. But if you're getting Ladd and Hampton, you're actually starting both those players. It has, their combined value a little bit more. So I think it really just comes down to, your needs. If you're just upgrading that wide receiver spot, I think it's a fine trade. But just make sure you aren't going to be using Hampton in the playoff weeks.
Warrig says Marvin Harrison or Tedero McMillan in full PPR. Well, I have good news, or maybe it's bad news for you, Warrig, but Marvin Harrison had an appendectomy and he's going to be out this week. So it will be Tedero McMillan for you. If you said rest of season, maybe I could get on board with Marvin Harrison, but I'm a little worried that he's going to miss more than 1 week with this appendectomy surgery. So we will see there. Bears Nation 23 says, is Quentin Johnston and DK Metcalf for Jalen Waddle a fair deal? QJ and DK Metcalf to get Jalen Waddle. So I like doing 2-for-1 deals this time of year. I want to be optimizing my starting lineup to have like the most upside possible. I think Waddle's better than QJ and DK Metcalf. Maybe not by a huge margin though. But yeah, what do you think, Leone? Waddle versus QJ and Metcalf.
If you're pretty certain on your depth, I'd make this trade, but I want to be sure. The one issue with optimizing now is it's still a few weeks away from the playoff weeks. If you get an injury or something and you have absolutely no other depth, this trade's close enough where you've got two pretty strong wide receivers that you might be kicking yourself. So if you've got a couple solid bench wide receivers, I think it's fine to make this trade. Or if you get closer to the starting playoff weeks, we have it as a very even trade, accounting for the two-for-one aspect of the deal.
All right. Last question here before we get back to our list. KV90 says, is this trade even? Nico Collins and RJ Harvey for Jalen Waddle and Rico Dowdle. So that'll be a good transition into our list here coming up. But yeah, Nico and Harvey for Waddle and Rico seems pretty fair to me. Leonie, what do you think about that one?
I think it's a really fair trade. We have the Waddle Rico side ahead. Now, RJ Harvey, as you mentioned, a good segue to the list, but he's going to have an opportunity ahead of him this week with J.K. Dobbins probably out, and that gives that side of the trade a little bit more variance. If Harvey can show off and hopefully hold on to a starting job when Dobbins returns, you're going to wish you had that side. If it just ends up being a 1 week thing, you're going to want the other side. So it just kind of comes down to if you want to take the risk reward bet on Harvey or not.
All right. We're professionals here. So we will transition to the number 3 player on our list, which is RJ Harvey. So I think RJ Harvey's played well on a per touch basis. They do not trust him in pass protection and on passing downs. They trust him to catch the football, though. He is a very, very, very good catcher of the football. So I think what's going to happen here with J.K. Dobbins likely out this week, what's going to happen, and maybe out for the season, what's going to happen is RJ Harvey's going to handle almost all of that base work, first down, second down. When they get into some pure passing situations, it's going to still be Tyler Bidet. And we'll see Jaleel McLaughlin probably mix in a little bit of change of pace. However, RJ Harvey has 6 touchdowns on just 75 touches this season. The Dobbins injury, I know people are going to say, oh, no, there's been no reporting on Dobbins. There's a lot of smoke around this Dobbins injury, including him tweeting, including him telling someone he was like playing Madden against that he might be done. It's a whole mess right now. And we saw this before. Bucky Irving came back into the game after his foot injury, and he ended up with a severe foot issue. Just like J.K. Dobbins came back into the game last week and now seems to have a severe foot issue. So I really like being aggressive now on Harvey, trading for him, picking him up before this news fully breaks. Leone, thoughts on RJ Harvey rest of season?
Yeah, as a high upside player, we've seen kind of the volatility in the rush game. He has kind of an average yards per carry. The way he's got in there is a lot of kind of unsuccessful runs and a few really long runs. As you mentioned, they are fine using him in the passing game as a traditional receiver, but not as the pass blocking back there. So I'm interested to see what happens to his pass catching role, if it gets hurt by this, if it gets helped by this. But either way, he's going to have a chance to showcase his ability. The only slight concern here for me, is a tough matchup against Kansas City, and then they go on bye. So you are, rolling the dice a little bit that this Dobbins injury is long term.
Okay. Number two on the list is going to be Aaron Jones. So I know Aaron Jones didn't put it in the box score the last couple weeks, but his usage has been awesome. I mean, he is way ahead of Jordan Mason. And Jordan Mason also underperformed, frankly, while Aaron Jones was out. And so I think they much, much prefer Aaron Jones gets this really good matchup here against Chicago, has a bunch of other good matchups down the stretch. When Aaron Jones is healthy, which hasn't been often, but when he's healthy and he has this fullish workload, his game is really fantasy friendly in terms of scoring touchdowns and catching passes, which is, of course, how running backs score a majority of their fantasy points. So this is a bit of a sneakier one. It's not a young guy. He's been banged up, but I do think Aaron Jones is way ahead, more ahead than the market thinks right now of Jordan Mason. Leone, thoughts on this Vikings backfield right now?
Yeah, we saw Aaron Jones jump up to a 63% route share in the last game. He's clearly the preferred option in the passing game for the Vikings. But as you mentioned, even on the ground, he was a 64% team of the team's carries last week compared to just 29% for Jordan Mason. That was Mason's lowest number of the entire season. So it does seem like the team prefers Aaron Jones here. Also, I have a little bit of optimism that maybe it's just that JJ McCarthy can't be much worse than he's been. And hopefully we see some growth out of a young player that helps the offense overall. And kind of the combination of the increase in role from Aaron Jones with this offense being a bit better, will lead to some good things. It's also a pretty solid playoff schedule for Aaron Jones at Dallas, at the Giants, and home versus Detroit. Those are three defenses that could definitely result in some big plays and some good offensive performances for the Vikings.
All right. Numero uno, number one on the list is going to be Zay Flowers. So a lot of the data on the Ravens is messed up right now because they didn't have Lamar Jackson for 3 games. Now they get Lamar back, looks to be 100% in a must-win game every time down the stretch, and you get to play the Bengals twice, and you get a bunch of other really soft spots also for Zay Flowers. So, you know, Ravens receivers are going to rely a lot on touchdown efficiency. Lamar's touchdown rate and touchdown efficiency throwing, I'm not talking about running, throwing has been so elite for a while now. It's like, I think it's sustainable and real. His touchdown rate is going to be way higher than every other quarterback. I know Zay Flowers' yak ability is way better than his touchdown scoring ability, but ability to score touchdowns is going to come when you're playing the Bengals twice and a bunch of other soft matchups. So if anyone wants to get off of Zay Flowers, I'm a big time buyer here right now. Leone, any more thoughts on this Ravens team down the stretch?
Yeah, you mentioned the high TD rate for Lamar. He currently leads the NFL with a 10.2% TD rate. This would be the third time his career leading the NFL in TD rate. And as far as the data being messed up for Baltimore, on the season, their pass rate over expectations, -4%, just -7% the last 4 games. But if we isolate the Lamar Jackson games, they're actually slightly positive in terms of pass rate over expectation. They haven't been able to get that ground game going with Derrick Henry as much as they have in the past. So if you get this team, kind of like Cincinnati, playing a little bit desperately, with ground games not working, I think they're going to throw more than people realize, and you get a wide receiver that I think is just underrated by the market. 2.5 yards per out run for Zay Flowers. Clearly the best option for Lamar Jackson. He's got a 28% target share on the season. Nobody else above 16% for the Ravens.
All right. That's our list. We'll circle back to it in a minute. We have about 5 minutes, 6 minutes here to get to as many of your questions as we can here ahead of week 11. Trent Kimmel says, should I start Travion Henderson or George Pickens in the flex? It would be hard pressed for me not to start Travion Henderson. And this is an awesome spot for George Pickens also against the Raiders. But I would be really hard pressed not to start Travion Henderson against the Jets tonight. Do not think Terrell Jennings is going to play very much. That is going to leave Dearness Johnson as the only backup to Travion Henderson against the Jets. So I would start Travion Henderson over like most guys this week. And that's not to say anything bad about Pickens. I like Pickens, but yeah, what do you think there, Leone? Travion or Pickens?
Yeah, I like Henderson. I think you want to chase, the young rookie who we knew had big play potential, just hadn't seen it until last week. Breaks off 2 long runs. Probably going to be much more involved in the passing game this week than he was last week. And on this show last week, we talked about the Jets' defense is one to take advantage of rest of season after they made those couple of trades. That's certainly the case for Henderson and the Patriots tonight.
Erie 93 says, who would you rather have rest of season, RJ Harvey or Jamison Williams? So I'm of the belief that this Dobbins thing is going to turn out to be bad. I could be wrong. I'm just kind of like reading the tea leaves, reading tweets, reading rumors. I'm guessing, but I think it's bad. In that case, I'd rather have RJ Harvey. If I'm wrong and it turns out Dobbins is okay, then I'd rather have Jameson Williams. But I think I would probably swing for the fences here and go with RJ Harvey. Leonie, what do you think? Harvey or JMO?
Yeah, Harvey is a little bit higher in our ETR rest of the season top 150 rankings, and I think this swing for the fences makes sense. I think Jameson can be a really solid piece with a very good weekly ceiling, but there's nothing better than potentially running into a workhorse high volume running back, especially one that is a rookie with big play upside like RJ Harvey has.
Darren Penley says, should I trade Bijan Robinson? So, yeah, I caught wind of this week where there's like a huge amount of panic in the season long community about Bijan Robinson because Tyler Algier is stealing so many goal line rushes. And I get that that's frustrating. I just don't want to give up on a player who can touch the ball 20 to 25 times in a game, can catch 8 passes in a game, and can run for a 60-yard touchdown. There are not many running backs on earth that can have that kind of workload, that kind of pass catching, and that kind of explosive ability. So I'd actually be rather trading for Bijan Robinson than trading him away. Leonie, how much does the Algier stuff bother you on Bijan Robinson right now?
It doesn't bother me much. We have Bijan at 17.3 expected fantasy points per game at the running back position. That's sixth highest in the entire NFL. And that doesn't account for his talent. That's just straight off, the opportunities that he's getting. And if you look at his expected fantasy points the last few weeks, yeah, they're down a little bit, 12.4, but then he had a 21.3 and a 9.5. I think it's just a little bit of run bad for him. He's someone that can catch the ball out of the backfield, score from distance, still going to get some goal line touches. He is also on the by Leone running back underperformer model this week, which is a model that basically says, hey, based on this player's volume, they're going to start scoring a lot more than they have over their last 3 game average. So I think it was just a bad stretch for Bijan Robinson. Expect him off that list pretty soon because he's going to put up a big fantasy point performance sooner rather than later.
Classy Frankie says, should I trade Rico Dowdle and Kyron Williams for Devon Achan? So he'd be giving up 2 solid/good running backs for a great one in Devon Achan. The win for Miami is just like huge, like for morale, for Mike McDonald, for everything. If they can get to the stretch there, they have very good fantasy playoff schedule due the Dolphins. So this one is interesting to me, Leone. What do you think? Kyron and Rico to get Achan.
That's tough. Kind of similar to the 2-for-1 question for Waddle earlier. I think I would want to know that you've got a little bit of bench depth to make this trade. I think it's a little bit of an overpay, which is fine for optimizing for the playoffs. But if you're fully optimizing now and you have zero, kind of contingent plans on your bench at running back, I think it's a little too risky. I understand the trade deadlines this week. You got to make your move. End of the day, I'd probably aim for the upside and shoot for Achan, but I do think Rico and Kyron are very, very strong plays. So if you're starting both, I'd be hesitant to make the move.
All right. Last question here today comes from W Turner 18. He says, what are your thoughts on Ricky Pearsall? So good news on Ricky Pearsall is it looks like he actually has a chance to play this week. Now, this is a PCL injury. This is an injury that has bothered a lot of guys in the past for longer than it should, including Leone's boy, Kyle Pitts. So I'm a little worried on Pearsall, even when he comes back, which could be this week. But I thought he looked pretty good before he went down. Now Jennings is back. Kittle is back. CMC is balling. I don't know that we're going to see Ayuk, but yeah, the Pearsall rest of the season is interesting. Leone, what do you think about Pearsall?
I think he hopefully he comes back healthy, and I think we're going to see some splash plays out of him rest of season. Little worried that the floor is going to be pretty low on a week-to-week basis, though, just because you mentioned the names there between Jennings looking healthier, CMC doing his thing, Kittle back. Kendrick Bourne's been playing really well for them. All those competition for targets on a team that might not throw a whole ton, might actually see their pass rate dip a little bit with Purdy, where they see some more downfield efficiency, but some more efficiency in the run game and less pure volume than they saw under Mac Jones. So I'm a little skeptical that he's going to have the volume that you really want from a fantasy perspective, but I am expecting him to hit a few big plays here down the stretch.
All right. Let's go back to our list here just to go over it one more time. Players to trade for before your deadline. Luther Burden just outplaying DJ Moore and Alameda Zacchaeus has to come through at some point, even if DJ Moore's shoulder injury proves to be okay. Joe Burrow might be back for your fantasy playoffs with the way that defense is playing. Joe Burrow, much like Joe Flacco, can have some huge games down the stretch if he is indeed back. Jameson Williams with the role change. Dan Campbell calling plays now, no longer just go routes, more play action, crossing routes, stop routes for Jameson. RJ Harvey as a play to try to get ahead of before this J.K. Dobbins injury news breaks. If it does break, I think is worth a play. Aaron Jones, way further ahead of Jordan Mason than the market believes right now as the big time feature back for the Vikings. And Zay Flowers, Lamar healthy, 2 games left against the Bengals. Really, really good spots coming up for Zay Flowers here. All right. That's going to do it for a week 11 edition of the Bleacher Report Fantasy Football Show. Appreciate everyone being here and hanging out each and every week. Good luck to you at your fantasy trade deadline. For Leone. For everyone behind the scenes at Bleacher Report and everyone behind the scenes at ETR, I am Adam. Good luck, everybody.